Good morning, welcome back. This is Daybreak and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. With me in the studio this morning, on my far right is Ahmed Hashi, governance and policy analyst. Good morning, Ahmed.
Ayub, delighted and thank you again for welcoming me back. Take a break from looking after my cows in Ngong. And nimesema asante sana.
Thanks for coming. Senator Richard Onyonka sits at the Senate, represents the county of Kisii. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Lovely having you.
I'm happy to see you. Happy to be here again.
Asante sana. And Council Nelson Harvey, former LSK president, also joins us this morning. Good morning, Council.
Good morning.
Lovely having you here. And Javas Bigambo is governance commentator. Good morning, Javas.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, gentlemen, a lot happened yesterday, historic in many aspects. The first impeached deputy president under the current constitutional order. And first to begin with you, Nelson, and you have made a series of tweets about the call for good governance and accountability. You have put Parliament under the spotlight. But first, are the chickens home to be roosted?
Absolutely. Two things. One, the yardstick upon which you can impugn the propriety of a public officer, a leader, to continue serving in office has now been lowered. And for president purpose, this is a good thing. Number two, yesterday was a manifestation that we have a National Assembly with individuals who do not understand in any way whatsoever what their job description is. But for posterity, there are many things to learn from this. And I believe going forward, as this matter travels towards the Senate, we'll have more light shed on it as we create more precedent on how to ensure that there is integrity and accountability insofar as those who assume the highest offices in this country are concerned.
Okay. Senator Onyonka, we'll also be talking about what this means because there are many issues that are happening in the public domain, including now the revelations about the admission by KNTC that Kenyans lost 6.6 billion Kenya shillings in the edible oil importation scam. There is the question about Adani, the tech contract for the healthcare scheme, the rollout by the government of the Social Health Authority. But ideally, did what happened yesterday bear all the hallmarks of a spillover of misgovernance by the Kenya Kwanza administration, who all the way had cheered Rigathi Gachagua, who were his vocal cheerleaders when he made statements that were at odds with the Constitution?
Oh, my God. I would want to say this. First of all, I actually feel vindicated, not because Honorable Gachagua has been impeached, just because the issues that we have interrogated here severally have finally come out. I mean, you're discussing corruption. You're discussing tribalism. You're discussing the winner-take-all argument about these percentages which Kenyans did not know. I mean, the reality is that when some of us are saying that our government or our system is broken and it is dysfunctional, it actually shows you how this dysfunctionality has manifested itself into the real into the real politics that we play. And indeed, for me, even after this event has come to pass, I think the political class must then deliberately sit down and say, honestly, why are Kenyans so angry about what we're doing? What is it in governance that we need to change? Because these are the matters that we are seized with. The country that we call Kenya, that we love so much, has reached a stage, if it is true, and I completely believe Honorable Gachagua to be independent until I see the evidence, because I've not received the evidence of the Senate. If it is true, then it's mind-blowing that a leader of Honorable Gachagua's capacity, and indeed as a vice president, the amount of money that he has made in the last 2 years is 6 billion in 2 years. For me, I don't look at Gachagua as a person per se. I'm talking about his office. Now, cascade that to all the cabinet secretaries, cascade that to all the political people, cascade to us members of parliament, go through the Senate, go to the governors. I mean, this is what my fear has been. That this is the reality and we keep talking about. The beauty of it, as my leader, Honorable Javier, said, the reality is that the threshold has come lower. The reality is that if you don't look at what is happening per se as if it's happening on Gachagua, that all of us now, and indeed I want to be very sincere with you, the president should not think that this thing is about Gachagua only. Even him now, he can be impeached. Even him, he can be impeached. So the reality of it is the standard is being lifted. The level at which public expectation expect us to behave well, us not to be corrupt, us to participate in helping a majority of people who are basically destitute and are in the villages and are in the slum areas of our cities. And generally, this story is about a vote of no confidence on the government of KK Alliance and the people, let me use this term without sounding derogatory, the old men and women in the house in that party and around the president must sit down and say, after Gachagua, is it going to go on like this? Or are we going to change the modus operandi and make sure that this country is governed respectfully and with decency?
Okay.
Yes.
Ahmed, if you look at all the 11 grounds listed against the deputy president impeached yesterday by the House, this, in retrospect, applies to the political class as a whole, is it, including the president?
I'm glad you said it applies to the political class. Isaiah Berlin, a philosopher, argued that a totalitarian mind wants to create functionaries of his society and in the political administration of that society. What we are seeing in Kenya has a context. We live in a political post-colonial society in which there is an uprising against every state in sub-Saharan Africa, including even North Africa. So you have seen what happened in Sudan. There was a popular national revolution, and the army came in to stop the revolution, and the society broke up. In Kenya, the civilians are the ones who are in charge and not the military. So there was a popular uprising in this country. And what has happened is that they want to ethnicize our politics. The political class wants to ethnicize it so that they can get out of the politics of issues, of Gen Z, and of popular transformation. So there is a logic behind the political class and what they're trying to do. This is not some midnight dream of the president just to impeach Mr. Gachagua. There is forces, social formations that have come into government. For example, Mr. Odinga, as ODM, has come into government and trying to push their way to get their Nusumkati. There are political leadership in Mount Kenya are fighting for the future of their presidency. They are trying to get rid of the people they think will be an obstacle. But what is missing in the popular imagination of this country is the political economy analysis of what is going on. We cannot interpret Mr. Gachagua as the political economy of this country. We can interpret social formations that produce him. And Mr. Gachagua was picked by Mr. Ruto. And in the totalitarian mindset of Mr. Ruto, he wanted a functionary like Mr. Gachagua. Mr. Gachagua was brought into office, and he refused to play ball. He tried to outdo the president on the president's script. And when the president saw that this was happening, he had no choice in the beginning. I don't know if you remember in another program, I criticized Mr. Gachagua ferociously over his statements in Kiambu, not in Kiambu, the woman from the Mau Mau who passed away. And Mr. Gachagua made a speech about the Mau Mau, in which he just ostracized the rest of Kenya and played the tribal card in a celebration of a national figure. You see, so the political understanding of what is happening in this country has to be understood that our president wants to be an autocrat. He wants to set the ground for extending his term, and he wants the people who are going to buttress that political agenda in the coming years. And I think this is a very dangerous precedent for our country, and as citizens we ought to stand up against that.
And for the record, the UDA party issued a statement about that bill by Senator Samson Cherargei, and though the conduct of Parliament is questionable, we'll be talking about that and ideally why they are overlooking and estimating issues that are of relevance in terms of what was laid bare by independent officers and also exposés, but Parliament seems to be dead against that. Javas, coming to you. In a nutshell, are we saying more or less the 2 years of circus now playing out and Gachagua being the sole casualty?
Well, like I had intimated a little earlier, we are witnessing before our very own eyes the effects of political climate change happening in Kenya. And we are seeing the erosion on the mountain. Mm-hmm. And Gachagua is evidently a victim. The exalted view of the law is that accountability is a critical cog in matters governance. And if at all in construing the Constitution, as it has been provided in Article 259, in propagation of good governance, the rule of law, equity, social justice, etc., is the perspective, presumably so, that National Assembly yesterday decided to have Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua face the guillotine. Mm-hmm. Then we can say accountability is a good thing, but it should not stop there. But politically, if we're to wear political lenses, the question arises, by this impeachment of Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, who did not have the good sense to appreciate that power has got its rules, and that when you offend those rules of power and politics, then misfortunes become the wind behind your sails. And this has been exemplified by the seminal works of Sun Tzu and even Robert Greene in the 48 Laws of Power. But beyond that, question emerges. What message is President William Ruto sending to persons within Kenya Kwanza and within UDA who ostensibly could be standing on his path in implementation of bottom-up economic transformation agenda? The other question that arises is it possible that Rigathi Gachagua, Deputy President, soon to be former Deputy President, was one among other actors that have been the encumbrance to the politics within UDA and within Kenya Kwanza? Remember, as we're discussing this, we have a former Secretary General for UDA, Cleophas Malala. Yeah. Now we have got soon-to-be former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, who possibly then could be next in this political guillotine. And as we look at all these in characterization of the politics of the day, and as of course we know, the postulate of evidence law is that evidence must be corroborated, and I'm happy that Senator Onyonka is here and he has said that as the trial house, the trial chamber, the Senate is, they are going now to look at everything quite closely, is that citizens of this country must be happy for a number of things. Be happy that for the first time we are seeing Parliament as a whole being excited about playing one of its major critical roles. Mm-hmm. And secondly, that it should not just be politics of the day at play. I want to pleasantly imagine that we are finding ourselves at a moment of a new dawn in this country. It's
Council, what then here, from your understanding and assessment, has been the role of the ODM party, given the reconstitution of the cabinet, 4 ODM party members named members of the cabinet by President William Ruto? And the last time there was a detente between the president and the opposition chief in 2018, we have seen sustained and consistent attacks against the constitution and independent commissions. What does then say about our democracy, which largely is hanging by a thread, when the opposition and the government blur that line that divides them?
Good question.
You see, at the highest executive level of governance in Kenya, the constitution is treated as an inconvenience. And it's from that premise that you can only explain why this has consistently happened. I've taken the position, I may be wrong, and it's good to be wrong so that I may be right eventually, that the inclusion of Raila Amolo Odinga's troops in the government of Dr. William Samoei Ruto is an implosion. And this argument is not one that is informed by the emptiness of my head. Several of ODM MPs in the National Assembly have said, one at a time, we impeach Gachagua first, then we'll impeach Dr. William Samoei Ruto. And you see, we need to read history and understand the reason as to why the Constitution was designed in the current structure. It was intended to enable a government elected to serve for 5 years to deliver on its mandate. There is nothing wrong in having an opposition. We must have an opposition. But you can't fuse the opposition and the government and blur the disparity that was intended by the Constitution. Therein lies the problem. And there is fear, a legitimate fear, that there may be no constructive development in the next 2 to 3 years.
So that's until the next electoral cycle?
Absolutely. What a loss. What a loss.
Okay, is that what Odinga also captures in his book, what Council mentioned, Senator, Flame of Freedom, that when he came to work with KANU in 1997, his main, his main drive was then to split KANU from within?
I'll be honest and I'll tell you that it's been for some of us one of the most difficult political decisions that our party leader would have made. Because the argument which was made is that if you look at the fact that the government has become so weak and there's a likelihood that it may not be able to sustain itself to the end of the next 5 years when the elections are coming. Some on our side were actually saying that, yeah, let the government fail. I mean, our reality is that this government went for elections, they had a manifesto, and they're supposed to be implementing ABC, and yet we are engaged with them on issues that don't change the positions which we held. What happened to electoral justice? What happened to the human rights violations? What has happened to governance and administration of public resources? I mean, have the corruption scandals reduced or stopped? No. So in reality, even we in the opposition on ODM have been deeply thinking about what is our role, what should our role be? Should we start then start cleaning up this government and talk about how wonderful they've been and how they have done excellent work when in the reality the facts don't support them? And the question then again on what I want to call ODM-A, their argument was that there's a possibility that slight soft power and soft diplomacy might help William Ruto change his way of operating, his behavior, his undertaking as a president. So we are caught in that space, and yet, to me, this is a space which has repeated itself since independence.
And what is the effect then in terms of mutation of that coming together?
Yes. Because
the last time they did so, and Council here was on record during the court period to challenge the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill 2020,
yes,
which the courts nullified, not only nullified, but made statements that were indictment on the political class that, look, this is no ordinary amendment of Katiba 2010,
that is true,
but attempt to dismember it, and that any attempts to do so will not happen without consequences.
That is true.
Was in the face of Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga then. So what's the effect of the mutation of this coming together on our constitutional architecture?
The effect is that I wish I knew I would be a wonderful fortune teller. What I see is a conglomeration of Raila's position meeting with William Ruto's position. I don't know whether those positions mutually agree to be functional. And yet my reality is that how I would have wished that this whole thing was handled differently. I mean, it's been a deeply discussed matter in ODM. Do we accept that, yes, the government has a problem, yes, there are challenges which they have, and therefore, yes, they needed help maybe from ODM or whoever to make sure that the ship steadies at least for the next 3 years? Or should we have let the government tank, and whatever the consequences out of that, we accept them? So this has been the fight that we've been having in the party. And finally, the other point I think I want to make is that these events, even when they look like they have been triggered by party leader Raila joining government, my honest feeling is that I'm agreeing with all my colleagues, the three of them, that this system is designed to be like that. The system doesn't allow a vice president who's going to look at the head of state and tell him, look at what Gachagua is talking about, the abductions. I mean, that is what he should have been done. He should have done, and I really give him credit for that. When these abductions started, he constantly raised them. He constantly talked about them, as many other Kenyans in the civil society and other people were talking about them. Why is it that the president doesn't listen to him?
Okay.
When you look at the other political issues, don't we really in this country have a serious problem with our tribalism? I think as a political class, we now need to really start looking ourselves in the eye. I remember Senator Chute was making a statement on the floor of the House, and he said something to do with, you cannot tell me that this fella who comes from Mandera has been confirmed, and then you are telling me that he shouldn't be confirmed because he's not part of those percentages which were distributed.
Yeah.
Are we a country that is going to be giving people jobs according to the 30 percentages, 30 or 40 percentage, irrespective of their meritocracy and their excellence?
Yeah. I have a record of this paperwork here with me, so we'll be taking a look at that and what this means for merit and our independent...
Exactly, and I think it's good. We are in good space politically. Yeah. Kenyans now needs to have this conversation.
Yes, briefly.
Remember I said patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. And Mr. Odinga, I remember when I gave a keynote address at the very founding of the ODM, I was deeply involved with that political party. We wanted to change two things. We wanted to bring devolution, we wanted to bring a new constitution, and we did that. But what has happened is the old quip by Hannah Arendt that says, you know, Mr. Odinga chose the lesser of the two evils. But nonetheless, it's an evil. It might be a lesser evil, but it is an evil nonetheless. And I think that Mr. Odinga came out as his true colors. He came out as the person that he was. When a person shows you who he is, you don't ignore it. You take it for what it is. And Mr. Odinga has decided, and I remember him saying this very clearly, you know, it's bizarre. If Ruto goes, do you want Gachagua to take over? The tribal politics, tribal nationalism. And I think that probably one of the greatest politicians of his generation, at the last moment of the wicket, he will understand me, failed to curve the ball. And in my view, I think that the sociology of our society is now on two parts. There is one group, a social formation of people who are under 25, who have certain beliefs. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Netflix, no tribalism, and they want proper jobs, they want to raise families, and they want a working nation.
Yes.
And then we have on the other side, the political elite who are stuck in the stone age of luxury, the luxury of Kenya's state. So this corruption that my learned friend on the left is talking about is not something African. This corruption was brought by those white folks from Kiambu and Rift Valley who used to come here on Thursday for their legislature, who built that parliament. That system itself was based on corruption. And when our leaders came into power, they pressed a button and something huge happened on the other side. And they just, instead of reforming this state, they continued. So no matter what constitution we bring, no matter what laws we bring,
very true.
What is critical is for us to have a cultural revolution in this country about what is the moral basis of our society in the 60 years after independence, and why is it that the dreams of the people who fought for the independence of this country are still not born. And at the end of the day, the people who are supposed to deliver this baby of change, if the political class doesn't do it, this country will experience a revolution.
Thank you. When we get back from the break, gentlemen, then we talk about that and many more, Council and Java's, a constitution without constitutionalism, the rule of law, and Parliament in itself granted the power to even impeach the president, but supplicates at the feet of whoever holds State House. And we'll talk more about that and the accountability questions at the doorstep of the National Assembly beyond the historic event which happened yesterday, and now that moves to the Senate. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikader. We are back with more. Stay tuned.